How's this? Excellent. God, it's good to be here. I feel very lucky today. I came to my first one of these 5 years ago, and the people that I met and the conversations that I had have changed my life. Being here with you all today helps me remember who I am. In talking to all you fine people, I noticed a pattern, a sort of meme that kept cropping up, and it comes in a couple of variations, but it goes something like this. I wish I'd been able to be involved with X before the familiar commercialized version of it made it boring, or hostile to privacy, or exploitative, or shabby, or dangerous, or whatever. The X here can stand for any technology. It's not always home automation. Usually we've watched something which, in and of itself, could have been useful and good for the world, but by the time it got any traction, it had become gross. I'm sure you can all bring an example readily to mind. You watch this cycle enough times, and it can start to feel inevitable. When is the last time you got to think about home automation, or electronic health monitoring, or social media without a sour taste in your mouth? One that comes not from anything implicit in the ideas of these technologies, but the reality of how they are implemented or monetized or accepted by social convention. Life under capitalism, you might well say, and fair enough, but I'm here to argue that there isn't actually anything inevitable about it. And to demonstrate, I'm going to talk about a technology where the dice that determine the outcome haven't quite landed yet: the personal electric vehicle. Transportation is complicated. A lot of different solutions are going to be needed to improve it in different situations, but just to give you a sketch of the problem, in the United States, about half the trips we take in cars consist of one passenger moving less than 3 miles. So I think it's safe to say, using a machine weighing thousands of pounds and costing tens of thousands of dollars, no matter if it's gas or electric, to move my flabby middle-aged bottom to a taco truck because it is too far away to walk in my lunch hour is not the best we can do in terms of efficiency or congestion or use of materials or use of energy or creation of emissions or operator health or city planning or very often even time. Some kind of small electric vehicle, much smaller than a car, has a lot of good applications. So I'm going to try and recruit you to that cause. Let's take a top-level tour of the PEV landscape, and maybe one of these will appeal to you. For this, we will need a silly graph. As you no doubt know, there are 2 primary dimensions which we use to measure the worth of any vehicle, and they are how good they are at getting you places, conventionally called the yeet axis, and how cool you look while getting there, which we measure on the fleek axis. Now, most people became aware of the idea of a personal electric vehicle when the way we drew this standard graph had to be changed to include a negative fleek region to accommodate the Segway personal transporter. I poke fun, but a lot of the arguments that Dean came and made for the Segway are the same ones I'd make for PEVs today. The limitations of the technology at that time made the Segway expensive, and it limited the range, and that combined with the negative fleek factor doomed it from the start. But Dean Kamen also founded First Robotics, so cut him some slack. Anyway, Segway would be the only dot on the graph for a surprisingly long time, and the only one truly in negative fleek territory until the other axis had to be expanded to accommodate the hoverboard, which is both bad at going places and makes you look ridiculous. So we won't talk about it. Eventually, someone asked, what if the Segway was more cool? Turns out it would be the Onewheel. A single brushless hub motor with a go-kart wheel and a little bit of a platform sticking out on either side of your feet. It borrows cool points from skateboarding and from surfing, so it achieves a high fleek score. Not so much on yeet. There's not a lot of room to pack batteries into there, so the range isn't fantastic, but it's getting better. Self-balancing on a single axle makes the Segway and the Onewheel the few electric vehicles on which it's possible to steer heavily at low speed or even at a stop, and it looks cool, but it carries what I would have thought were some pretty obvious implications for safety. Any demand for more power than the system can give you tends to deliver the rider headfirst to the accident scene. True story. The day I decided to sell my Onewheel was the day that I checked the Onewheel subreddit and found that the top 3 posts were all the x-rays of the broken clavicles of younger riders than myself. This frightful liability situation probably contributed to drive the other reason we have to talk about the Onewheel, and the reason I wouldn't recommend buying one to anyone in this room. Future Motion, the company that makes the Onewheel, has gradually descended into Cory Doctorow's nightmares. They own patents which prevent anybody from making anything Onewheel-ish. They sue the makers of aftermarket parts. Their warranty as written prevents you changing your own tires. And the engineering prevents you changing your own battery. Replacing the battery is actually a very straightforward job with basic tools, but you can't because, for starters, they won't sell you one. But also, they're serialized, and if the board detects that you've taken the liberty of changing your own battery, it will up and brick itself. There is no authorized service center, save for one. The one and only way to have your battery replaced without voiding the warranty or risking the board disabling itself is to send the whole thing to the holy provinces of Santa Cruz, California, to Future Motion's one and only facility where a board-certified Onewheelologist will break the sacred seals of your board in a safe and controlled environment and break out the electric screwdriver and do the 20 minutes of work that you'd have been perfectly capable of doing in your own garage. Imagine every Apple product had to be shipped to Cupertino in order to be evaluated, let alone repaired, and you've discovered Future Motion's service strategy. This is really dumb. This is the sort of stupid fate we fear for all PEVs. This is the fate we try to steer the industry away from, and it's an attitude almost universally reviled by their customers, but their patents give them a monopoly, so there's nowhere else to go for that particular experience, or almost nowhere. We'll come back to that. First, we're going to talk about e-bikes. If you're comfortable riding a bicycle, and especially if you're comfortable wrenching on one, e-bikes are almost certainly the best hacker-friendly entry point to personal electric vehicles today. You would be amazed at the fun to be had and the utility to be had from a secondhand mountain bike and a conversion kit from eBay. The internet is awash in e-bike parts, and the level of compatibility is high. The basic ingredients in the system will fail to surprise you. You need a bicycle. You need a battery. You need a brushless motor made either to be built into the wheel or packed into the bottom bracket. And you need a motor controller, which is usually tethered to some kind of display, frequently a lousy display, with a few buttons. The communication between the controller and the screen is usually just UART serial with protocols which are child's play to reverse engineer, so there's a lot of territory for mischief there. The throttles are usually just analog output Hall effect sensors detecting a moving magnet on a thumb or finger lever. This is simple stuff. Totally familiar experience to anybody who knows their way around bikes, handles the way you'd expect. It's easier to steer when you're moving. Every part of the system can be customized how you want it. You can optimize for range, for speed, to assist in pedaling, or to work mostly from the throttle like a sort of electric motorcycle. Basically, take the experience of riding a bike, take out the worst bits. You can keep it as active as you want, but no more so, and extend your range about as far as you'd ever want it. If you're tidy in your retrofit, an e-bike can also look like a bicycle, which makes it the lowest profile PEV we'll talk about today. It's easy to hang a couple of saddlebags on either side of the rear rack of an e-bike and cover most of the hub motor and hold all the electronics and batteries. They're also the least expensive PEV we'll talk about today, which is easy to kit out for carrying more cargo than you can fit on your back. All these things give e-bikes a very high position on the yeet axis. You can put them more or less anywhere you want on the fleek scale. Next up is scooters. Now, people use the word scooter to mean a couple of different things. Some of them mean electric mopeds, sometimes called a seated scooter. Electric mopeds are effectively the top of the size and power scale for e-bikes. Some of these can be nice if you want a turnkey product. Their sort of mopedish look and size makes them a little more comfortable in traffic, maybe a little more confidence-inspiring. Their weight, range, and value proposition are typically not great, but if you really like the 50cc moped experience, but not the broken down 50cc moped experience that tends to go along with it, they're worth a look. They tend to be highly integrated, so hackability is not really intended, but when has that ever stopped us? Pretty high fleek, middle of the road yeet. Next up, electric kick scooters. It used to be that people tended to associate these with the early 2000s era affairs with the tiny inline skate wheels, but the pattern goes back the better part of a century, and it's subject to countless variations. You can see why this form factor is great for an electric vehicle. The deck can become a box full of electronics and batteries, keeps the center of gravity low, the wheels can be replaced with brushless hub motors. Nowadays, if somebody is familiar with these, it tends to be because they gave rise to the cursed plague of scooters as a service, fleet vehicles from the likes of Bird and Lime, which end up littered all over the place like the discarded horcruxes of venture capitalist wizards who are bad at thinking through consequences. This is rather unfortunate because most people's first impression of scooters is of vanity e-waste being ridden badly and unsafely by an ignorant operator who drives it like they stole it because they'll never see it again. But this is not the whole picture. Scooters which you own can be very handy. The scooter market extends upward from the sort of useful but limited beaters which get turned into rental fleet vehicles up to the sort of thing with a full suspension which can go off-road and climb absurd grades and go 50 miles an hour or more on the flat. The top of that market is definitely enthusiast territory, but there's gold in the middle, and some of the best value propositions of any turnkey PEVs are there. The riding experience is pretty intuitive. If you've ridden a bike, it'll take a little getting used to. Like most electric vehicles, they have hair-raising torque, especially the dual drive models. The throttle curves tend to be optimized for speed demons, but you know what? Throttle is just an analog voltage, so there's really no reason to settle for what they give you out of the box. Obviously, it's easier to steer when you're moving. Just as a point of reference, today you can spend $1,600 and get a 50-pound scooter which has full suspension, a top speed of 33 miles an hour, and goes 40 miles on a charge. Delivered, ready to ride, and completely ready to customize, because literally every single part that makes it up is on AliExpress. And the way the parts interact is very electrically straightforward. People can and have scratch-built entire custom electric vehicles from the spare parts components available on the commodity scooter marketplace. Go nuts. As for Fleek, well, they don't look amazing. But they've just about got the best thing going for practicality, in my opinion. So now we're on to something a little stranger. What if the Segway had a midlife crisis, a Red Bull sponsorship, and issues with clowns? Then it would be the electric unicycle. This is the end of the PEV world where the greatest concentration of top speed chasers can be found. Essentially, an EUC is a motorcycle wheel with a powerful hub motor, a brick for a battery, and two little footstands on either side. To give you an idea of what the top of this market looks like, this is the upcoming InMotion V13 Challenger. It weighs 110 pounds. It has a 126-volt battery. The motor has 10 kilowatts peak power output, 5 kilowatts continuous. They say it has a top speed of 87 miles an hour. Now, it's not fair to represent the EUC world as being exclusively the domain of the daredevil types. There are fairly practical versions with good yeet scores if you can get used to the riding posture. When it comes to looks, I'm going to have to leave it to you. I don't really know. I guess they look cool, but when I see pictures of them, all I can see is Gizmo Duck. That might be a me problem. Hackability does not seem to be very high on these, but I don't know them well. So if this seems like your kind of thing and you're into that, go forth and reverse engineer. But please wear a lot of pads. Next up, electric skateboards. Electric skateboards are a thing. They're so good. Take a longboard and attach like fist-sized motors to the rear wheels. Put a battery underneath and you're off to the races. They tend to be controlled by wireless handheld controllers. Obviously, it's only possible to steer them when you're moving. They look badass, they go places, but they're interesting for another reason, and that is their culture. So far, the PEVs we've looked at that are hackable are mostly hackable by accident or coincidence. But electric skateboards have probably the strongest DIY contingent of any PEV, even more so than e-bikes. DIY and boutique-built boards are a huge part of the culture, and even the commercialized turnkey products take repair and customization as a given. Why has it gone this way? Well, partly the skateboard community has always been very hands-on with their kit. and some of that culture came with them. Partly it took a surprisingly long time for mass-produced products to arrive on the scene, so the DIY space was proportionally bigger. But the important thing to notice is that the culture and expectations of the space were shaped by who showed up. Let me give you my favorite example. For a long time, the motors and speed controllers that people used to build their boards tended to be borrowed from the drone and hobby RC markets, and this wasn't great, especially where speed controllers was concerned, and it was sufficiently irritating that a Swedish PhD student named Benjamin Vetter spooled up as a side project an absolutely top-flight open-source speed controller. He built the hardware, the firmware, and the configuration software, the whole smash, open source, the Vetter Electronic Speed Controller, or VESC. Now, the project now has a very active community of developers and users. It has become truly ubiquitous, not just in DIY boards, even in most high-end boutique boards, come with a variant of this board in them off the line. The presence of it and the excellence of it created expectations which are now baked into that community and their expectations from products. So in large part because Vetter showed up, no one-wheel style black box nonsense stands much of a chance in the electric skateboard world. In fact, the funniest part of the story is that it goes full circle to where we started, because people are now taking the VESC and using it to build DIY one-wheel style boards and liberate used one-wheels from the Future Motion ecosystem by gutting them and replacing all the electronics. And you love to see it. So, what are the opportunities? Keeping in mind that I'm not deeply involved in all of these spaces enough to know the needs, here are a few ones that stick out at me. VESC can always use some more help. On the hardware side, they could use some help getting around supply chain issues. Couldn't we all? And variant boards for specific use cases could make users' lives easier in those spaces. You can reverse engineer all the things. There are just a handful of commodity controllers in each of these spaces. Having the protocol between their little interface screens and the actual ESC documented would be a big help, especially since the screens are reliably the worst engineered part of the whole thing. There may be a good niche for a universal or nearly universal open source interface. Learn to build batteries. Knowing how to build batteries well is a useful portable skill, and it's fun. And if everybody knew a competent battery geek, the number of battery fires from people who had nowhere to turn with their damaged pack would be greatly reduced. That would be good for everybody. If you get into PEVs, being able to roll your own can also save you a lot of money. Now it's time for everyone's favorite, politics. Laws are just starting to be made in this space, so especially if you have privileges that mean that you can more easily be taken seriously in your local politics, be the expert in the room so that the laws we get aren't ridiculous. So, PEVs are fun. They're not crazy expensive. They're really useful. Give them a go. I think the difference between things like VESC and products like the Onewheel is worth working for because I like PEVs and I think they're important. I'd encourage you to jump in and shape this technology while it's young and impressionable. But there's also a bigger picture, so bear with me for a moment of unironic sincerity. I meet at Superconference an aggregation of the smartest, most capable people I have ever met. So whether or not you pick this fight, if you don't have a hobby horse like this, I implore you to find a technology or a scene that you care about and pick a fight. It's too easy to watch the pitch go by and then complain about how technologies turn out as if positive outcomes happen on their own. It's too easy to be cynical and pretend that negative outcomes in technology are inevitable. They're not, but we will lose every fight we don't show up for. So pick something that's personally interesting to you and bend the curve. Make it your business to influence how these things turn out. Vetter made open source speed controllers his business. Jonathan Oxers made it his job to bend the curve on home automation. Kenneth Finnegan decided to make sure that Linux gets mirrored enough to stay available. Shaw made environmental monitoring not just his business, but his job, and mine. I'm sure there are tons more examples in this room. If you have a mission already, that's great, but I'm here to give the pitch. It's a bummer that technology does not automatically, naturally shape itself for the best, but we can shape it. It's evident that tools don't orient themselves naturally towards good, but we can steer them, and it's easier to steer when you're moving. Thank you very much.